welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. If you haven't, do subscribe. We review anything and everything from Captain America through to Bridget Jones through to this, a review of an Iranian film called The Seed of the Sacred Fig. This is a film that's only just relatively recently been released in the UK. Its director, Iranian director Mohammad Rasoulof, has had to seek exile, actually, in Germany. And this is an incredibly powerful film, incredibly important film. Now, I just want to say before I get going on the review, it's really important to state that when one looks at global kind of conflicts like the Israel-Gaza conflict, obviously there are sides in any war, there are sides in conflicts. And because one is, and we have as a family and as kind of influencers, we've been really kind of, really loud about supporting the Palestinians. We're also aware that, of course, organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, they're supported by Iran. And it doesn't just go that because we support the Palestinians, we are therefore supporters of Hamas, Hezbollah and Iran. Regimes across the world, Russia, China, Iran, but I would incidentally add Israel, America, are all privy to the same rules-based system that we theoretically have all signed up to. Every country in the world has its own human rights, egregious human rights kind of controversies and issues, and just because we're in the West and because we're white and because we are theoretically in a democracy or in a democratic system that we deem to be democratic, doesn't mean that we aren't privy to the same sort of, if you like, examination or exposure to, criticism. And so again, what I'm trying to say is that Iran is a state that's fucking scary, incredibly repressive, and certainly not one, just because we are supporting the Palestinians, that one wants to promote as an example of how we would all like everyone to live. You can have more than one complex thought there. So I just want to say that. So I want to, at first, for the beginning of this review, give a huge shout out to the director, Mohammad Rasoulof, but also the cast of this film, who I do understand have been, have now got a target on their back, courtesy of the Iranian regime. And it will have been an incredibly brave and incredibly difficult film to make. Right, it's low on sort of, if you like, action or necessarily sequences. This is a very talking head heavy, family orientated drama. It was shot, I presume, undercover at times. Sequences in cars and moving about within Iran will have had to have been shot in a manner that was kind of, I presume, made to look like they were tourists or they were just traveling, or they certainly weren't shooting a film that at its heart is intensely critical of a system and a culture and a regime in Iran that is frighteningly Orwellian and frighteningly Kafkaesque, to literary references there. This idea that you are trapped in a, we've seen lots of films over the years about the sort of East Germany and the Russian, the Stasi and the secret police. The idea that it doesn't happen in the West is a joke. It happens, it just happens with a bit of a smile and a Starbucks coffee alongside it, but it still happens. And it's a film that focuses on, we sort of start the film focusing in on the father in a family. And the father has clearly, he's a very quiet, contemplative, beautiful eyes. He's got the most astonishing eyes. He's a father with his wife and two teenage daughters, one slightly older than the other. And as a family, they live in a relatively, sort of relatively humble kind of abode, a flat within a series of flats in central Tehran. He's just been promoted, but the film starts with him coming home and feeling nervous and being nervous. It starts with him agitated, he's on edge, and essentially it transpires that the dad in this film, the main guy, the father of this family, is an investigator for the authorities. And what that means is that essentially he's kind of part of the secret police. He's responsible for investigating, but at the point in this film that we meet him, he's just been promoted essentially to a kind of low-level judge. But he has aspirations, and in any system and in any culture, if you go up the kind of pecking order, your life becomes better and more comfortable, you get more money, your family is more secure, etc., etc. So he's in this world. He's embedded within the system of Iran's regime, and his wife obviously is very supportive. But he's on edge. He's nervous. He's become sort of scratchy. He's become agitated, and his agitation is because he knows that in essence what he's been asked to do, and this is shown to us quite early on in the film, what he realizes he's going to have to do is essentially condemn people without sufficient evidence, or without testimonies or evidence or statements that have been given of their free will. He realizes that essentially he's going to become a tool within an incredibly oppressive state. Meanwhile, this film does really interesting, fabulously fascinating, because we don't see a lot coming out of Iran. It's a little bit like China, you know. I mean, certainly back in the 70s, 80s, you saw very little of these countries, and Iran is a little bit similar. You don't get much footage that hasn't been pre-edited, or the authorities have, like North Korea, you know, where the authorities haven't decided what you can see. And in that sense, it is very different to many countries in the West and so-called democracies. I mean, you really just don't see this material. And so what's interspersed throughout this film, very cleverly and very niftily and very sort of dangerously for the filmmakers, is real footage, real social media footage that predominantly the teenage girls are viewing or watching or seeing on their phones. And that's a really clever device for giving us a sense of the kind of social upheaval, or the extent to which the population and the citizens of Iran are essentially up in arms. I mean, and most of the footage we see are young students, it's women wearing the hijab, you know, protesting, getting beaten, getting tear gassed, shot at, dragged off, arrested, etc. So all of this is this is the context, this is what's happening in Tehran. So then you've got father who's a kind of essentially a reluctant, but he's not got much choice. He's not a bad man. This is the clever thing about this film. He's not a bad man. He's just a man trying to eke out a living within a system that's not fair. But it's troubled his morals. But he might be troubled. His morals might be troubled, but he's going to get on with it, and he gets on with doing the job in hand. And what transpires is then he kind of very much sort of evaporates and becomes this quite sort of absent presence or character within this family, which is quite accurate, because of course within the family he's always going away. He doesn't really see his children as much. The children sort of ask their mum, "What's wrong with Dad?" He seems a bit more agitated than normal. He's been given this gun, and the gun is important. He's been given a gun to look after himself, because there are those who are in opposition to the state who release the addresses and details of judges and people working for the regime in order to make their lives hell, and in order for them to be potentially assassinated or hurt, or their families to be hurt. So paranoia creeps into this film quite quickly at the point that Dad has got a gun. He shares this detail, or his wife sees that he's got a gun, and she's like, "What's this about?" And he's like, "Well, what I'm doing is dangerous." And she's like, "How dangerous?" And he's like, "Well, it's dangerous, but we'll be okay." And she kind of accepts. And the mother in this film is incredibly powerful, a really powerful performance by the actress who plays the mum in this film. Because she ends up becoming this sort of, she has to kind of observe this balancing act between protecting her husband, the father, who's become very distant and is having to do a really unenviably difficult job. She's also trying to manage the political curiosity and social curiosity of her two daughters, who are kind of witnessing more and more the fact that Iranian society and the regime isn't fair, and it isn't balanced. There's all sorts of massive kind of human rights abuses going on the street all the time, and so the daughters are becoming agitated and curious, and they've got friends. And then the mother says to the kids, "You mustn't bring friends round. We mustn't let anyone know who your dad is or what your dad is." And the girls, his daughters, don't fully know what he does and how deeply he is involved in the sending away, if you like, or disappearing of people in Iran. Dissidents and political activists and protesters. You know, the idea that if you're caught in a protest on the streets of Tehran, you could face up to 5 years in prison just for protesting. So yeah, when we say, "Oh my God, we're having our right to protest removed," it's nowhere near the extent to which is already removed in a country like Iran. And so what develops is this becomes an incredibly brooding, stressful, tense family drama, where the sort of shadow of their father's work, which we see very little of. We see him every now and then sort of talking to his work colleague, but we don't really see him doing his work. We don't see him interrogating people. We don't see him passing judgment on people. You just have a sense that he's going out and he's doing this job. That's what I mean. It's very Kafkaesque and Orwellian. Meanwhile, the girls are, their social circle is increasing. They've got friends, female friends, who are getting caught up in some of the kind of riots and protests. They themselves get caught up in the protests too. And slowly you begin to realise that, oh my God, these girls are becoming politically aware. And if they become fully aware of what their dad does, this could create an absolute explosion within the family. And then we have a classic kind of cinematic trope or narrative storytelling device, which is so sort of spectacularly simple and undramatic in so many ways. But around this moment, the entire rest of the film pivots, and what happens is the dad's gun goes missing. But what then transpires is that clearly the implications of this for the dad are that he himself could be seen to be as unreliable. There may even be within his family some kind of agitator or political activist who's agitating from within. Can he trust his family? So his work colleagues start to challenge him on whether his family, his wife, his two daughters are trustworthy. He goes through that self-examination. He tries searching for the gun. There's a really fabulously believable and stressful single camera handheld search around their apartment, their property, their home. Look for the gun, and you're desperately willing it to appear, because the implications for this dad, and thereby by extension for the family, are just going to be catastrophic if he doesn't find it. But he doesn't find the gun. He doesn't find the gun. The mother tries to challenge the daughters. They challenge the daughters. And so, of course, the schism and the distance between dad and mum and daughters builds. It gets bigger as they begin to be like, well, why don't you trust us? What is wrong with you? Why aren't you trusting us? And all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, other friends of the daughters have got themselves into deeper and deeper shit with the regime. They've been arrested. Some of them have gone missing. One of them has been hit by shrapnel in one of the marches. And so the paranoia and the need to not be found or discovered as a family, both from his side. So you've got all of the worries about him being essentially operating for the state. He's become a puppet of the state. He's working for the regime. So as a family, the mother's trying to hide that from the family. And the world, because otherwise he might become a target. But also then you discover that the kids are beginning to hide something from him. And then this film kind of evolves and moves off into a need for them to head off on a sort of break. The dad decides, look, we're going to get away from Tehran for a bit. We just need to cool down. It's a chance for us all to kind of connect together again. And you're thinking, blessed be, thank God. He's going to see the light. He's just going to leave his job. But no, there's no choice. They're all trapped. And so, as they're heading away, spoiler alert, we discover, well, I won't completely spoil it, but we discover who's got the gun. We discover what's happened with the gun. And then this incredibly stressful, tense, prolonged sequence occurs in a beautiful, again, parts of Iran we just don't see in the mainstream media. This whole sequence scene towards the end of the film happens in his hometown, and it's basically a town. It's like something out of Star Wars. It's a sort of buildings built out of sand, and there are minarets. And I don't know if you saw our travel vlog when we went to where did we go to? It wasn't Crete, was it? Did we go to Crete? And there was those incredible kind of caves in the mountain hill. It was like that, and this whole kind of village or town that's been carved out of the land. A chase develops, and the chase was very reminiscent for me at times of Hitchcock's like Vertigo and North by Northwest. It felt Hitchcockian as the father's hunting down his kids, and it becomes sort of like Night of the Hunter. And then the monster in the film becomes the dad, and the dad is kind of not trusting them. We have these strange, really horrific, horrifying, scary, interrogative sequences where he's basically taken them away to interrogate them and to film them being interrogated. Earlier in the film, there's also another moment where his work colleague, or the husband of a friend of the mum's, has called them in, and they're being videoed and they're being asked questions, and then they're cross-referencing the questions. And at this point, with all this kind of interrogation, you're sort of thinking, oh my God, this is every way bit as bad as East Berlin and the Stasi and the SS during World War II. You're thinking, oh my God, the control here, the desire to kind of point the finger. And so the husband who's become a paranoid wreck, and the mother who likewise is now paranoid and trying to protect her kids, you know, it turns into almost a literal horror film of the family in which everyone is essentially going to lose and lose out. You know, the dad is taken from a place of not feeling comfortable about what he's been asked to do, about essentially throwing innocent people, or people who haven't done that much wrong, throwing them into jail, potentially giving them, finding them guilty and then being given the death sentence, to not trusting anyone in his family. And in fact, what's happened is the kids and everyone in the family have tried to do the right things by themselves and for each other and for their friends within a system that's deeply, deeply unfair. And so the title, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, apparently refers to a particular species of fig tree which wraps itself around another fig tree or another tree and then takes it and turns it into itself, almost like imagine it as being like it's almost like Night of the Living Dead. but like a cuckoo that takes the home of something else. It sort of possesses another tree and then emulates it and takes it over. And in this film, the sacred fig, if you like, is the dad, and the state has taken him as a fig tree and twisted him and turned him, and by extension twisted and turned the entire family into a self-destructive moment with this incredibly powerful final shot, which again I won't give away fully what happens, but it's crucifying, it's exhausting, it's desperate, and this is an incredibly clever, very simple, very straightforward. The drama is the constant burgeoning sense of control and paranoia, and as I say, that strange Kafkaesque sense that the system will judge you regardless of whether there's enough evidence or not. This isn't about evidence-based. And so the gun, I found myself, I've never been more desperate to know, A, where a gun's been taken to, or where it's gone, to have the gun returned and just hope that everyone can return to normal, but then also not wanting the gun returned because you're wanting them all to escape, and then thinking, if the gun's returned, what will that mean? Who's going to then be vulnerable? Who's the one who will have to admit that they've taken the gun, and what's going to happen to them? Incredibly tense, incredibly stressful, incredibly revealing, eye-opening film about a regime about which we hear very little. And it's films like this, I was reminded watching this about how important and how brilliant cinema can be to essentially time travel us, but also physically travel us. I was jettisoned into a flat and a family's life in Tehran, and experienced up close the absolute sort of terror of trying to live your life, or even in any small micro dot sort of way challenge the system, the oppressive system. It was an incredibly revealing, incredibly educative, incredibly shocking reminder that regardless of what we see in the news, behind this there are just ordinary people trying to live ordinary lives. And when you go in with a microscope, you realise just how extraordinary those ordinary lives are. This is a remarkable piece of filmmaking, brave piece of filmmaking, and an important film for anyone with an interest in global politics or world cultures to watch. And I would give this a stonking 95 out of 100.